Welcome, everybody. We're so delighted that you're here with us. My name is Laura Stewart, and I'm just so proud to represent a 95% group tonight and to share with you, for those of you who may not be familiar with 95% group, our foundational principles. We believe that all children deserve a chance to learn to read, and we know that you share that with us, or you wouldn't be doing the work you're doing, you wouldn't be joining us tonight. And again, we are grateful to you for the work that you do. And our purpose is to unlock the power of literacy for every child. We do that by building on the science to empower teachers, as a matter of fact, all educators, with knowledge, resources, and support that you need to transform your developing readers. Those are kind of what I call our North Stars that really drive the work that we do every day. Another thing that I want to say about our organization is that we are a trusted and proven provider of literacy solutions, and we are made by educators for educators. Most of us in the organization are educators at heart, and I always like to say that the work we do is really driven with both the mind and the heart of a teacher. So it gives me great pleasure this evening to introduce our guests. And I think Louisa Moats, probably you're all very familiar with her and the work that she's done over the years, but I'll just give a brief bio here as a way of welcoming her to the webinar. Dr. Louisa Moats is a leading voice in literacy and a lifelong champion of teachers. Louisa has been a teacher and a psychologist, a researcher, a graduate school faculty member, and is the author of many influential scientific journal articles, books, and policy papers on the topics of reading, spelling, language, and teacher preparation. And you certainly know her as the co-author of Letters and the groundbreaking book, Speech to Print, Language Essentials for Teachers, among many other important works. She served as a board member and officer of the International Dyslexia Association for many years and led the committee that developed IDA's knowledge and practice standards for teachers of reading. She's here tonight to talk about spellography, which she co-authored with our next guest. So welcome, Louisa. Our next guest is Dr. Bruce Rosow, again, the co-author of Spellography. Bruce began his career as an intermediate grade classroom teacher in Vermont before moving into remedial instruction, and he also served as an academic dean. Dr. Rosow taught in the Language and Literacy program through the Reading Institute in Williamstown, Massachusetts. He taught at Simmons College and Bay Path University. He also ran the Language Lab at the Wyndham Central Supervisory Unit in Vermont, which provided remedial instruction to struggling middle and high school readers. He is currently a private tutor. So welcome to our esteemed guests, and I will turn it over to you, Louisa.
Thank you so much, Laura. Hi, everybody. I am so happy I get to not only talk about spelling for this and then 3 sessions after this, but I get to do this with my colleague, Bruce. And I'm thrilled that all of you out there are going to get to know Bruce a little bit better through this work that we're doing, that we have done jointly for the last few years. So some of you may be familiar with spellography, many of you may not. And these sessions that we're doing are focused on the relationship between language and systems of language and spelling. So they're going to be 4 sessions. The first one tonight gives us a chance to focus just on phonology and the role of phonology in learning to spell. The second session will be about the system of phoneme grapheme correspondences in English, which of course is, shall we say, complex, but can be taught and understood. The third session is a very important one on the role of morphology in the English spelling system, how morphemes are represented in English spelling. And the last session is going to be a topic that not many people talk about, which is the relationship between syntax and the role of words, the way words are used in sentences and the way they are spelled. So we really look forward to delving into these topics. Whether or not you are a user of spellography, we're hoping that the information will be useful to you as you undertake spelling instruction, which I often think of as the poor relation in language arts. We don't pay enough attention to it, and it's very, very important. So our objectives in designing this, it's really a word study program for intermediate kids, is to improve not only their spelling, but also their reading and vocabulary, and in general, their language proficiency. We want to also excite them and interest them in the English language, because we think and we believe and we've experienced the idea that English, when we delve into English, it is intrinsically interesting to most people. We also want to guide students into discovering how language works at all of these levels: the level of the sound structure of the language, the phoneme grapheme correspondences, the patterns in the English spelling system, the meaningful parts of words, and the history and origin of words, or etymology, which has a lot to do with the way we spell in English. And then again, the role of grammar and usage in our spelling system. This is a structured language approach, if you use that vocabulary. We believe that in teaching all of these aspects of language, the learning of one aspect reinforces the learning of the others. We're strong believers in the integration of instruction in all of the language systems and modalities. We've experienced in our own work the importance of linking one to the next very closely. It's not a traditional spelling program, by the way. Our approach is much more focused on understanding why words are the way they are, and the learning principle that underlies that approach is that we will remember best what we understand and have thought about. So we want to take rote practice out of spelling instruction and focus on whatever meaningful ideas we can surround the given word with as we're learning how to spell it, read it, and use it. This is review for most of you, but I want to remind you that we read and spell words by building connections or neural pathways in the brain between areas that are specialized for sound, for print processing, for meaning, and for the use of words in sentence context. So this diagram has arrows that go in both directions, signify the importance of the interrelationships among these language systems and the interdependence of these language systems. So although we're going to focus on the role of phonology tonight, we don't want you to think that instruction is just about that. In fact, in the actual lessons that we teach, integration and the relationships among all these systems is the primary goal and primary focus. So what does it take to know a word? One of the concepts that from research that underlies what we do is that when we know a word well, we have a fully specified, what we call a fully specified lexical representation. That's a fancy way of saying we know exactly what's in that word if we are very fluent and accurate at spelling and reading and using it. So, for example, the word universal, which is a word that kids will be able to spell by the end of the third book of Spellography, has these aspects, linguistic aspects or aspects of linguistic structure, which are all addressed in the instruction. So it has 3 morphemes. But the suffix al marks its grammatical role. It marks it as an adjective. It also has 4 syllables. So the morphemes and the syllables are not the same, but the morpheme uni has 2 syllables, and the student needs to be able to distinguish between what's a syllable and what's a morpheme in order to recognize the meaningful parts in the word. The word has 8 graphemes. And what's a grapheme? It's a representation of a phoneme. And it also has 9 letters. So the number of letters is not the same as the number of graphemes. We spell the phoneme with the grapheme ER, a two-letter grapheme. And then there's the thorny issue of how many phonemes there are exactly in the word universal. So I've spelled out what they are, but Bruce and I have an ongoing dialogue, as many of you out there do, about how we represent and talk about the U, the glided long U. We call it glided long U, or the glide guy in Bruce's terminology. And there is a glide, y, in the beginning of the word universal that is not represented in the spelling. So what do we do about that? Do we say there's a phoneme that's not represented? Well, the way we talk about it in spellography does tend to separate those two phonemes, y and u, but then again, we have to combine them. And another way of talking about that combination is to call it a diphthong. So there we go. It's complex. It's not straightforward. And the word universal also has two schwas in it that have to be dealt with by spellers who cannot sound a word out exactly by saying it slowly because of linguistic features like schwas in the word. So that's a problem we have to deal with. We, from the very beginning, in our approach in spellography, we emphasize the idea that language is a layer cake. It's made up of language systems that, again, have distinguishing features and properties, but that interact with one another. So in the phonological system, there are 44 consonant and vowel phonemes that we teach directly, and phoneme awareness has to be stimulated in order for kids to have a mental image of the spoken word, if you will, and the constituents that make up that spoken word. We'll talk about that in a minute. We also delve into the nature of the writing system. We talk about graphemes, phoneme grapheme matching, and phoneme grapheme correspondences, patterns of letter use, rules for adding endings onto words, which are the suffix addition rules that trip kids up. Syllable types do come into the instruction, but we're careful to distinguish syllabification from morphological analysis and word building. Etymology, or word origin, and morphology play a major role in spellography in our lessons and the units. We also directly teach something about sentence structure so that the relationship between the role that a word plays in a sentence and its spelling can be made explicit for kids. And why is identification of phonemes difficult? So now when we contemplate the reality of the speech to print relationship, and we start looking closely at what is in a spoken word, and we even look at a spectrographic readout, and this was supplied to me by Ann Whitney, thank you very much. We can see that when we say a word like Indian, all of the phonemes overlap and are spoken together in an undifferentiated stream. Likewise, with igloo, there is a slight break after the stop consonant g, and that's what the white space is. But again, the phonemes flow together. And the same thing with itch. The white space is the silent part of that unvoiced consonant, ch, as we say itch. So there are no clear divisions when we look at readouts like this. There are no clear divisions between the phonemes and the spoken word, and it is a cognitive and linguistic challenge for kids to take a word and break it into its constituent sounds. It's a metalinguistic skill that is developed through instruction and experience, and experience with print. So experience with print helps develop phoneme awareness, but we also know and have seen that direct instruction of phoneme awareness bolsters and gives a template for kids to match print to speech. So those two aspects of language interact constantly. So why is phoneme awareness important? Why is the ability to take a spoken word and divide it into its constituent phonemes important? Well, we know from research that a high level of phoneme awareness is required for good spelling, even more so than for good reading. One of the astonishing things that came out of the research that I was involved in a few years ago. Weak spellers and poor spellers typically have unresolved weaknesses in phoneme awareness. Typically, not always, but typically, and it's something to be alert to when your kids have trouble spelling. Spelling error research, and there's quite a bit of it, and I did a lot of it in my early days as a researcher, it tells us that the errors that kids are making when they are poor spellers and when they have phonologically based weaknesses in their language processing, they're challenged by very specific aspects of word structure. So, first of all, they have trouble processing all the sounds in consonant blends or clusters, and they typically leave out the internal sounds in consonant blends or clusters. They have trouble identifying sounds that are embedded in words, particularly liquids and nasals. So not all speech sounds are equally difficult, which again points to the linguistic nature of the spelling task itself. Vowel identification, especially the identification and differentiation of vowels that are close in articulation, is problematic for kids who have what I call fuzzy phonology, or that is their internal phonological representations or the memory they have for the sounds in a word are not very well specified, so that sounds that overlap or sounds that are close in articulation are an undifferentiated mess in their heads, if I could use that colloquial term to describe what it must be like, what it seems to be like for our spellers who can't sort things out. They also have trouble representing unstressed or unaccented syllables, and that's where schwa and instruction around schwa comes in. They also have trouble pronouncing multisyllable words, especially when we get into morphologically complex words, spelling and saying the stress patterns, or saying the stress patterns in morphologically complex words, and then using related words that have different pronunciations to help them solve spelling problems. And they also have, and this is something I've learned recently from the work of Valeria Rigaban, who is a young up-and-coming researcher. She has shown very clearly that a good speller will look at a word that is irregularly spelled and map that difference between speech and print quite fluently and automatically, and say to themselves, oh, that spelling's a little odd because it doesn't really follow the patterns that I know for how that word that sounds that way should be spelled. But then that insight helps the person record the word in memory. A poor speller does not engage in that recognition process as fluently because of the weaknesses that they have in phonological skills in the first place. So let's look carefully at some errors that kids may have made in some of the writing samples that I've collected over the years. And Bruce has a lot more of these that, given an opportunity, he will share with you. But I pulled out one example of the problem spelling all of the sounds in a consonant blend. So for example, this student wrote the word strange without the t sound, and also left out the nasal before the final consonant. We'll get to that in a second. This student also confused the vowels in the word he wrote dill, and the word is deal. Those are very close in articulation, E and E. E and I, sorry, E and I, very close on the vowel chart. And this is the kind of confusion that kids make when they have not fully processed what the sounds in the word are in relation to how the word should be spelled. Sometimes kids confuse consonants with overlapping features. So for example, this student wrote a T on the end of the word trip. And what do T and P have in common? They are both stop consonants that are unvoiced. And the difference is in the place in the mouth. P is a front stop consonant. T is a medial stop consonant. And then omitting nasals in a certain, in the position where they are sandwiched between a vowel and a following consonant. We see this a lot. We have collections of errors. They're in the speech to print text and the workbook, for example. But in the word inviting, there's no N between the initial I and the following V. And the word around, there's no N put in after the vowel ow and before D. So it's not that the student doesn't know the letter N or the sound that N makes. The problem is a linguistic one. The problem is that the N sound that we who are already good spellers know is in these words is lost in articulation, and in that in the student's pronunciation of the word, that nasal segment is not salient enough for the student to pick it out of the speech sound stream, and the student needs a lot of explicit instruction with this particular issue. Because it's very common in the kids that we've worked with in the beginning and all through every age level, actually. And then we have the problem with syllable omission. In this writing sample, this student spelled the words allergic, cousin, Chicago, and sister in this way. And this student is probably one who needs phonological instruction at the syllable level, saying words slowly by syllable and saying them slowly syllable by syllable as they are spelled, and learning about schwa and learning about what a syllable is made up of. The student's instruction would have to begin there. The instructional routines that we use in spellography are designed to integrate these layers of language. So when we put the phoneme awareness and phonologically focused practice into the lesson, it's done in a way that it flows into the other segments of the lesson. It doesn't just live out there as a separate set of exercises that have nothing to do with what comes next. It's fully integrated. So once the spelling concept is explained in the introduction, we do very brief but targeted phoneme awareness activities that I'll demonstrate in a minute that have to do with the specific concept that the lesson is focused on. And then the activities flow right into studying the spelling pattern with a variety of practice activities enumerated here. Reading lists of pattern-based words is something that we've put into almost every lesson, because having to recognize these patterns in print reinforces what we're teaching the kids about spelling and forces them to pay very close attention to what is in a series of printed words that often look a lot alike and that have to be attended to in detail in order to be read accurately. And that exercise is done as a fluency exercise. So kids time themselves a couple of times to see if they can improve their fluency on those word lists. Then we do morphological analysis. Actually, as the program goes on, there's more and more of an emphasis on morphological analysis right through every unit. Writing words to dictation is a feature of every lesson. And at that point, we hope kids are going to use what they've practiced to be able to write the words that are sampled from the lesson that we've taught. And we also then, when appropriate, invoke usage and syntax to help explain the patterns. For example, with anything having to do with homophones, the only way to help kids sort them out is to use them in context and have kids create sentences that use the words in context as they're sorting out which spelling goes with which meaning. So with phoneme awareness, let me give you an example of the kinds of things we ask kids to do. First of all, we focus again on sounds, only on sounds that are relevant to the specific lesson that we are teaching. We don't do phoneme awareness for its own sake. We do it so that we can activate the kids' phonological processing system to prepare it for the focus on print that's going to come. As Bruce says, we try to create the parking spots for the graphemes by helping kids become super aware of what the phoneme constituents are in the words that they're going to learn how to spell. So without parking spots, there are no places to stick those graphemes in memory. We don't overdo these exercises. We do them in a way that is fast-paced. We want the teacher to do more of it or less of it, depending on the kids who are in the group that they're working with. We believe that teachers should be able to adapt to the students. If the students are very good at this, they don't need very much of it. If the students are not making the kinds of spelling errors that we just reviewed, they probably don't need a lot of this. They probably can get right into a focus on print. But since our research and the research that I've done with Rebecca Treeman and others, since it points to the fact that there's a close relationship between phonological awareness and spelling, and our poorer spellers really need direct work on phonology, we directly teach them what the speech sounds are in the language. We directly show them, and this is in the covers of the books, all the books, the vowel valley chart and the consonant chart. It's there for reference. It's there to show kids when they're having trouble distinguishing certain speech sounds. It's there to show them why those speech sounds may be hard to distinguish, because the vowel valley chart, in case there's anyone on this call, this webinar who doesn't know this, let me just quickly say that the vowels of English are organized by where they are placed in the mouth, starting with high smiley E, going to I, A, I, O, U, and U. And then we put on our chart 3 vowel R combinations that are taught this way because of the way our spelling system works, R, and or. And we separate out 2 diphthongs, oi and ow, that don't fit neatly on the chart because of the change of mouth position that's required to say those sounds. We also use the consonant chart. So, for example, when we teach in Book A the sounds of X, and we're teaching the prefix X, And we're also reminding kids that the letter X is the one in the English writing system that represents two phonemes. It's the only one that represents two phonemes. We teach them directly that it can represent the voiceless k, s combination and the voiced g, z combination. And why do we do that? Because if we don't do that, kids will, and I see this a lot, kids will write the word exam, E-G-Z-A-M. We take our cues from what the kids do. What the kids do tells us what they need to be taught, what they need to have clarified for them. So where do we start? We have words that they have to sort into those where the X sounds like X, like the letter X, and those that sound like eggs, like a dozen eggs. So they sort these: excel, expand, excite, extract, accept, exclaim, versus exam, exist, example, exact, exert, exotic. And it may seem like a subtlety because in reading, when you're teaching kids to read, this kind of subtlety doesn't necessarily have to be brought to light. But when we're teaching spelling, it does have to be, because if kids are trying to, which they do, try to spell by the sequence of sounds, and they're still glued to that phase of spelling development where they're relying on sounding everything out, they will not necessarily recognize that the eggs sequence is also EX. So this is the way we use the charts. This is the consonant chart. So we would use the consonant chart to point out the difference between S and Z, and the difference between K and G, because the voiceless S or K, S is in one form of X, and the voiced G, Z is in the other form of X. So we refer to articulation to make this clear. What is the difference? It has to do with voicing. It has to do with where the air is blocked. It has to do whether the sound is stopped or continuous. So it has to do with manner of articulation in this case. Likewise, if we're teaching the sounds of QU, by the way, it's really important for kids to know that QU is not one sound, that it represents two sounds. And sometimes we have to overcome misinformation that is embedded in some of the reading materials and reading instruction materials that the kids have had. So in order to get after QU and QU in spelling, the start place is to get kids to, again, mentally process or be metalinguistic aware of the k, w sequence that QU represents. So for example, we have quick word chaining exercises where kids can use tokens to show what has changed if we go from cot to Scott to squat to swat to sweat and to set. So squat has sk, w in it, but swat has only s, w in it. So those finer distinctions are really important for kids to, again, develop that fully specified phonological image of what is in the spoken word so that they will not leave sounds out in their spelling, and they'll recognize the sequence that is represented by QU. A deletion task would go like this. Say squid. Say it again without w. What would it be? Skid. Say quake. Say it again without w. What would it be? Cake. Say squat. Say it again without w. What would it be? Scott. So those are demanding tasks. They're more complex tasks than simple segmentation, but they're needed for kids to sort out a sound sequence like what is in squat. How about speech sound substitution? What does it sound like? Say the word quench. Say it again, but change w to ul. What do you get? Clench. Say squall. Say it again, but change w to r. What do you get? Scrawl. Say scrod. Say it again, but change r to w. What do you get? Squad. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that we do in these quick phoneme awareness exercises, again, to prepare kids for focusing on the relationship between speech and print. You can't, sometimes there are arguments about the value of these exercises, and there's no way that kids are going to become better spellers just by looking at the print. That's a fallacious argument. The problem is that the phonological template for recording what the print representation is not well enough established for kids to make that match and get that word into memory. Final blends, one of our favorites. In book B, for example, we have a whole targeted lesson on that problem of omitting nasal sounds from consonant blends. So what do? First of all, review the fact that there are 3 nasal consonants in English. We then do some word chains and substitution exercises like the ones I demonstrated for QU. And then we sort words by the nasal sound that is in the words. And this is where, again, you can't become fully aware of this phenomenon just by looking at print. You have to abstract away from it and feel what your mouth is doing with a word like blink. What is that nasal sound before k? It is not n as in nut. It is in the back of the throat. It's like the it's the same as the in slang. It's the same as the in stunk or Congo or dangle. And so that's the problem there, is recognizing when it occurs, and then having a basis for understanding that the letter N can represent in certain positions in words as the combination NG represents at the ends of words when there's no consonant that follows. If you don't teach this explicitly, what you get is kids writing blink, B-L-I-N-G-K. We have lots of examples of that. We don't want kids to do that. And the way to make them aware is to teach them explicitly, again, about the nasal consonants, and then about the letters that represent these nasal consonants, with the one in the back of the throat being the problem. And notice as well, for those of you who are excited about this kind of thing, that always in articulation and word building comes before the stop consonants that are articulated in the same place. So b are a combination in English, nt, nd in the middle position, and nk and ng exist in final position. And this has to do with the place that this insight has to do with the place in the mouth where we articulate these sounds. So this is the kind of depth we go into in spellography, because we found that this is what opens the door to insight and enables kids to get some conceptual handles on what is what in our print system. We also do a lot with syllable awareness, with exercises like this, where we ask kids to say this syllable on its own, lar. Now say this word, cellar. What has happened to this syllable? Lar, solar. What has happened to this syllable when it's put into a word? Tar, mortar. What has happened to it? And so on. Vor, flavor. What has happened to it? Of course, when it's unaccented and it has a schwa before the the spelling of it is not obvious unless for some reason that syllable becomes accented in a form of the word. So this is an exercise that we do a lot to make kids conscious of unaccented syllables, and we give them other tools to remember those. We do, for example, especially in book C, which has a lot to do with long vowel spellings and complex vowel spellings in English. We do phoneme awareness exercises that involve shifting the vowel in a word and doing this mentally, doing it orally. Say leader. Now change E to A. What do you get? Say ceiling. Change E to A. What do you get? Change fast to feast. Change fast. Change A to E. What do you get? Feast. I gave that one away. And then for more complex phoneme awareness exercises, which we get into in book D, which we're working on, that'll be hot off the press in about 6 months, probably. We point out to kids that words like educate, gradual, schedule, individual, future, nature, creature, pasture, don't sound the way they look. So we get kids to consciously process the difference between the way the word sounds and the way the words look, and ask them, okay, so the du in these words, in du, the d sounds like what? In tu words internally, the t sounds like what? All right, so our spellography routines includes explaining the spelling concept, practicing phoneme awareness, studying the spelling pattern, reading lists of pattern-based words. And where we're going to go next in the next webinar is a focus on how this phoneme grapheme correspondence system works. And we'll look at some of the exercises we do with kids to make them fully cognizant of it's an understandable system for the most part, but it is complex, and we need to be careful and deliberate about teaching it in a step-by-step way. So I'm now going to give somebody else a chance here. Bruce.
That would probably be me.
That would be you.
Hello,
My
everyone.
colleague Bruce, I just want to say my colleague Bruce is the person who's drafted all of the lessons that become spellography. He has the experience as the person who has taught this to students of many different levels and ages. So go for it, Bruce.
Well, first of all, it's deeply moving to look at the list of people that are here with us tonight and see the broad representation, and to know that so many people are hearing about this program or using it or involved in this type of teaching. It's really amazingly powerful and rewarding. Everything that I learned about this, just about everything I learned from Louisa, what's been different is that I've spent most of my time in classrooms working with kids. And the program Spellography is a result of 20 years of reviving the earlier version of Spellography, 20 years of making it better, of learning. One of the questions I saw, and there's some really wonderful questions in the chat, is you know, how do I use this, or how can I use my speech pathologist, as Louisa was going over spelling error examples. And the spelling errors are the guide. It's like respond to the response. When you see spelling errors, if you know how to interpret them, they're telling you what the student knows and doesn't know about a word. And that diagnostic information is your light. It shows the way for what that student needs. I see some questions about, does this program work with dyslexic students? Most of the students I work with are dyslexic. So yes, but it's the level of intensity that's required. So this program was written for general classroom use. It could be taught at a slower pace with additional support for tier 2. It's not a tier 3 program, but there are a lot of concepts that are germane for all the tiers. One of those concepts that we're focusing in on tonight is the phonological processor, phonology, and then phonemic awareness. And as Louisa was showing you, this is an intermediate grade program using phonemic awareness. Well, why are we doing that when people say, hey, phonemic awareness should be over after the primary grades? And the reason gets back to that spelling error analysis and the light that shines. There are particular areas that are very confusing for kids. And the letter X and the fact that it represents 2 phonemes is one of those pieces that's really tricky. And the S blend is slippery. And if you track like axe and ask, it's very hard for many students to figure out what's going on between those 2 words. So certain areas are difficult. And you determine what those areas are from working with kids over lots of years. You see lots of errors that are complementary. And you say, okay, we need to shed light on this. And the way to shed light is to originally clean up the sound sequence so that there are parking spots to park the letters. If you can clean up the sequence of sounds, especially when it's tricky to pull sounds apart, like with nasals, like with L and R and liquids and initial blends, like with the U and the QU spelling, like with the X and EX and so forth, with the TU and those advanced words like nature, like TR in the beginning word, where you get a truck, you get a ch-er instead of a t-er. There are areas that you can predict are going to be difficult. So in the spelling program, we address those in sequence and use the phonemic awareness to clean up, make a foundation upon which you then introduce the letters. And the idea is that you're not doing this for hours and hours. You're doing it quickly. It's fun. It's efficient. One thing I would advise as the teacher, you're not special ed teachers, most of you are regular ed teachers, but is to be aware of which students are either slower or which students are making errors. Those are the students that you're going to want to revisit. You might want to do some of these activities again in small group. You might want to talk to your team with your speech language person to take a closer look at those kids, because they're telling you something about their perception of speech that is going to impact their ability to spell and read. And so that kind of diagnostic information as you're doing phonemic awareness is really good. A couple more things. Whole class, sometimes there are kids that are really fast and they're always going to give the answer. Well, you can have cueing. They can hold their nose or raise their thumb, or there doesn't have to be immediate answers. So there's ways that you can manage whole group phonemic awareness to give kids that need more time that time. And then your own observation of their responses to be able to find the kids that are really struggling with this and to dedicate more time with that. So overall, the fact that the phonemic awareness is very targeted, very specifically targeted, that it is quick, that it can be used as in a diagnostic method as along with an instructional, and that it is only one part of weaving in the layer cake structure of language. because the program is really based on that initial understanding that language is a layer cake, that understanding each of the layers of language structure provides a much stronger lexical access to a particular word. And to weave all those layers together in a sequential manner from, pretty simple words to very complicated words, that's been the journey that has taken Louisa and I 20 years. It's a very complicated thing, and we have tried to make it so it's a simple thing for you, the teachers, to use. So hopefully when you look through a lesson, the lesson has its own logic to it, and it makes sense to you, and you can understand why we're layering one thing on another. And then as you go from one lesson to the next, you see that we return to a basic structure of what we do initially, what we do in the middle of a lesson, where we end up at the end of lessons. It's very predictable in that way. The other thing, one last thing, is we're working with kids, not machines, not adults. Kids really like to have fun. If kids are laughing, if you're goofing around, if there's some level of humor and stupidity, it really helps. It greases the gears. It makes it so that there's enjoyment about this unlocking what language is. And you should be able to laugh about it. You should be able to use wordplay. You should be able to have fun. So hopefully at the end of the day, even though there's a ton of science and there's a ton of detail, attention to detail in the weaving together the layers of language that we have done here, at the end of the day, hopefully it's engaging, it's fun, it's raises questions, it makes kids curious about the history of our language and where words come from and how QU came to be, how the spelling of English came to be, because the history is really rich and quirky and interesting, and sheds light on how we came to where we are in the present. So reading through these comments has been a real treat for me. Thank you all so much for the interest and the use of the program, those of you that have used it and have appreciated it. And we're just so excited to get this in the world in the hands of kids and to change the trajectory for our kids, make sure that our kids grow up learning how to read.
Thank you so much for this. This has just been I'm following the chat. The chat is just lit up. There's so many great questions and comments and so much wonderful enthusiasm for spellography. So Louisa, thank you so much. And Bruce, just adding that practical piece has just been so enlightening and important. So we really appreciate that. So what you see here now on the screen is the continuation of this series. And Louisa, do you want to comment about any of these upcoming webinars?
Yeah, we're going to focus on one topic at a time and gradually pull it all together by the end. So I hope all of you who are with us tonight will tune in for the other sessions where we will give the complete picture of all that we try to address in spellography. There we go. Bruce and I will be doing them together.
Wonderful. That's terrific. We do have actually a couple of minutes. So can I ask a couple of questions that came up in the chat just real quick? One is, can you reiterate how long are lessons, spellography lessons?
Well, we designed them to be approximately 30 minutes and 3 times a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So with
Go ahead,
that,
Bruce.
one of the things that we learned from the first version of Spellography was to make the management of the program simple. And so you start at the start and you turn the page and you go through the program. There's no like circling back to do this and that and mixing it all up. And you have your own pacing and you have your own students, and your students work the way they work, and you know your students. So to say a lesson is 30 minutes, do it 3 times a week, yeah, that's the standard answer. But you know your kids, and you know what they need, and everything is in Spellography is in there for a reason. So take your time. It's not a race. And my opinion, 5 days a week. It's a study that is stronger with more intensity, right? So so it's designed to let you be the boss as your teacher of your own students and adapt it. And hopefully that's easy for you to do.
Great, thank you for this. So is it fair to say that it's intentionally designed and it's flexibly used?
Yes.
Okay,
Well said.
thank you, thank you. And can you just comment, could either of you comment about the use of this program with our English learners?
Well, my opinion is that English learners need it as much as anybody. They need to be taught how the language works. And it's the integration of all these layers of language that's going to be helpful to them. There's a lot of vocabulary building, as we look at the structure of words. And those English learners whose first language is a Latinate language like Spanish, there'll be a lot of opportunities to see cognates and the commonalities that come from the Latin influence on both of our languages. Yes.
And in particular, the topic tonight is super important for second language learners, ELL, whatever the term you want to use, clarifying what the vowel sounds are, clarifying that back nasal from the middle nasal. There are so many confusions that are made because consonants are similar for students learning English. Using the consonant chart, differentiating between voiced and unvoiced, being really clear about whether the air is blocked in the front, middle, or the back of the mouth, so that all students, but especially English language learners, get the identity of the complex phonemes in place so that parking spot is well identified before they park the letter. It's just crucial. And I think this program is going to be really powerful for those students.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. All right. Well, very good. I think we're just at time. So if you want to advance to the next slide.
Okay.
And I did want to mention to everybody, yes, this is going to be recorded. You will have access to the recording. And if you've registered for this one, you are automatically registered for the others. Am I right, Barbara Patterson?
Yes. Registering one time gets you access to all 4. Yes.
Great. Awesome. And we'll let you know when the webinars, when the recording is available. So I wanted to also just share this with everyone. Please save the date for Wednesday, April 17th, where I'm going to be working with my colleague, Sue Edelman, who's our Vice President of the Digital Platform at 95% Group. And we're going to be doing a second webinar on the literacy intervention system. And this is looking at how we utilize our intervention resources within our technology platform. You don't want to miss it. It's really exciting. It's a one-of-a-kind system that we have put in place at 95% Group that is both exciting and effective. So go ahead and scan that QR code there, and you can sign up for that. And last but not least, if you'd like to reach out to me for any follow-up, please do. Here's my contact information. Also, if you're interested in learning more about 95% Group products, including Spellography, here are regional account executives. So we're going to leave this up so that you can look for your state or region and find your regional account exec. You can reach out to your regional account exec for more information about all of our products. We are so proud to offer Spellography as part of our 95% literacy ecosystem. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us and spending your evening with us. Louisa and Bruce could not be more thrilled to have you with us tonight. And are there any final thoughts before we sign off?
Well, this is fun. This is my happy place talking about this stuff.
Exactly.
And getting into the nitty gritty. I
Mm.
love it. I'm so glad that there's so much interest. Yay. Thank you.
Yes, that's so right.
Thank you
That's so
very
right.
much.
Yes.
And we're just so thrilled that this program is getting into the hands of our kids. And we're so excited to support all of you in implementing it, to hearing from you about other support that would be helpful. And we're just so proud of what's been produced here and what it's going to do to help kids.
Great. Wonderful. Well, we will leave it at that and wish everyone a pleasant evening, and we'll see you at the next one. Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.